Last Sunday, we dealt with Jeremiah and what Jeremiah's preaching had to do with our lives today. And we tried, but we didn't get very far. But that's the nature of Jeremiah. He's the great preacher for a lot of reasons. And so today we look at how Jeremiah influenced Jesus and how that relates to our life today. And certainly Jeremiah had an incredible influence on Jesus, as Jeremiah has on many, many great teachers and preachers. And I mentioned Martin Luther King last week. Let's remember our overall scheme. The early preachers, the early prophets were people with visions. Then the exilic prophets came along, of which one of them is Jeremiah, and they took those visions and turned them into where they created a new cause and new purpose for the Israelites. And so then Jesus came along, and he took these causes of the exilic prophets and turned them into a way of life. And that's what we're dealing with today, is how Jesus turned the causes that Jeremiah had into a way of life. And let's remember that after Jeremiah and before Jesus, you had the Babylonian Empire, you had the Persian Empire, you had the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire, to where you had all of these political and national forces just working against any faint hope that Israel could restore what the establishment wanted. So as we progress through Jewish and Hebrew history, we see a gaining influence of the preachers. And so let's look at, remind ourselves, Jeremiah had three main causes. That is, to introduce the new covenant compared to the old covenant. Then to take on the artificial and empty rituals of the temple. And to replace, the third cause was to replace nationalistic religion with a personal faith. And so let's look at these three in terms of how it influenced Jesus' teaching, life, and ministry. First of all, the new covenant. Jesus was a person who sort of brought all things new, all things fresh. And Jeremiah talked about how the old covenant was etched in stone. The new covenant was to be etched in the hearts of people. So let's just take one of the commandments of the old covenant and see what Jesus did with that. Remember the Sabbath day and keep it holy. And so many legal ordinances were built around this one commandment. One of my favorites was that if you were to walk on the Sabbath day, you could only go a certain distance without eating. So you go to a family for a meal, your own family. But how did they sort of get around that? Well, they would take food along and they would walk the prescribed distance that was their limit for the Sabbath day, sit down and eat a bite, and then go ahead and go further. Again, the legal ordinances around all of the Ten Commandments in the book of Leviticus is just filled with them. But let's see what Jesus did with this old commandment etched in stone. Luke 6. On the Sabbath, while he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. But some of the Pharisees said, "Why are you doing what is not lawful according to the Sabbath?" And Jesus answered, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God and took and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priests so to eat, and also he gave it to those with him. And he said to them, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. All of a sudden, Jeremiah's thought that it was a new covenant became a way of life for Jesus, even as he took one of the sacred commandments etched of stone and made it into a way he lived. And the very next paragraph is how he entered the synagogue and taught a man there whose right hand was withered, and helped. And again, he was asked, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm, to save life or destroy life? So all of a sudden, Jesus took that commandment etched in stone and made it a way of life. You see, Jesus didn't experience the Sabbath as a way to leave Sunday through Friday. Sabbath was Saturday, as a way to leave the rest of the week. He took the Sabbath as a day that where there was need to meet that need, whatever the case might be. The only news medium that I read regularly since 1974 is the Christian Science Monitor, and I subscribe to that and read that because it approaches issues globally, not just locally from the United States. This picture is in this week's Christian Science Monitor, and it's a man with some steps and a door, and it's called The Upward Journey. A man walks through the torii gates that are shrined in Tokyo. The gates symbolize moving from everyday life into the realm of the sacred. Not Jesus. For everyday life was where there was sacred, not just on Sunday or the Sabbath when you escaped everyday life. So again, here's a teaching of Jeremiah about the new covenant and new understanding, and how Jesus incorporated that into a way of life. The second emphasis of Jeremiah was the cause of getting rid of artificial and empty rituals of the temple. Remember last week we talked about Jesus, that Jeremiah talked about the pivot has changed, the temple being the pivot. And he said, now it's the hearts of men and women that are the pivot of what God's love is all about, not just the temple. And we read in Matthew about how this became a way of life for Jesus. In Matthew 6, beware of practicing your piety before others in order to be seen by them, for then you will have to no reward from your Father who is in heaven. This, when you give alms, sound no trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may be praised by men. Truly I say to you, they have received their reward. But when you give alms, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that your alms may be in secret, and your Father who sees in secret will reward you. Again, Jesus took on the empty rituals that were oftentimes for public display, And Jesus talked about throughout his ministry an inward, private commitment of justice and love. For the purpose of rituals is not to have an end in themselves for Jesus, but the purpose of ritual was to drive people to a life of justice and to a life of love. And this became so much of a way of life for Jesus. Remember what Jesus did towards the end of his ministry as he confronted what was happening in the temple in Luke 19. He drove the money changers out. So he not only talked about the temple going to be destroyed, he had a part in destroying the temple by driving the money changers out. For indeed, the money changers in the temple became all ingrained in the establishment's control of the social order. And Jesus said, no more. You see, Jesus took this cause of Jeremiah and implemented it in his way of life, calling attention to the end of rituals, love and justice, disclaiming any rituals which had an end in themselves of emptiness and artificiality to be seen by others. Then finally, Jeremiah talked about replacing a national religion with a personal faith. Let me just define quickly. Religion is the human attempt to get to God. Remember in those first stories in Genesis to try to explain why things are the way they are. Remember the story of the Tower of Babel. That was the human attempt to get to God, building a ladder to get to God. That's what religion is all about, the quest to get to God. But faith is believing that God has come to us. The belief that God has come to humanity with the gift of love. So the whole direction of religion and faith are different. I must tell you a quick story. And we were in a church where we attended in Wichita, and we started to sing this song, and my dad shut the songbook and put it down. Said, "I'm not going to sing that." And my mother said, "Bill, why wouldn't you sing that song?" I said, That's not what happened with Jacob. And the song was, "We are climbing Jacob's ladder." Remember the dream of Jacob and the ladder? What happened in that dream was not that Jacob climbed the ladder, but that God's messenger, the angel, came down the ladder to Jacob. That's the difference between religion and faith. And Jeremiah opened the door to what that difference would be, in faith being including a personal relationship with God. And all throughout Jesus' life, for Jesus, God is wherever one stands. God is in whomever one meets. So wherever Jesus stood, there was God. Whomever Jesus met, there was God. For Jesus had that constant communion, that ongoing communion with God that Jeremiah said must replace national religion. Let me end that with another quick story. Is the tradition of the Brethren Church. In the day before automobiles, there was a prayer meeting every Wednesday night at the Brethren Church, and one person was always there, sort of the patriarch of the congregation. And they decided the next week they would pray for a family that was poor and without food. And so they gathered that Wednesday night, but the patriarch was not there. They were very concerned about him and prayed for him because he never missed the prayer meeting or worship. And a knock came on the door towards the end of their meeting, and the patriarch's son was there, and they were concerned and said, "Oh, your father isn't here. What's the matter with him?" And the young boy said, "My father is fine. He's sent me here to share with you that his prayer is in the wagon." And they couldn't figure out what in the world the son's message was, and they left the prayer meeting and went out to where the wagon was, and it was full of food. You see, all of a sudden, the ongoing communion with God is not a periodic time of sometimes we pray, and that's when we're really concerned, and sometimes we don't pray and we're not really concerned. No, it's an ongoing communion with God. Indeed, sometimes his prayer needed to be in the wagon. So Jesus took these teachings of Jeremiah, and it became a way of life for Jesus, the one we follow. Now there's a lot in there to talk about, so let me raise some questions for us. First of all, what are the occasions in your own life or in the life of others that you have observed when religious legal ordinances, like remember the Sabbath and keep it holy, have prevailed or prevented acts of love and justice? Secondly, what are occasions in your own life or in the lives of others that you have observed when empty rituals have been done to be seen by others rather than to drive one to acts of love and justice? Thirdly, what are occasions in your own life or in the lives of others that you have observed of periodic prayers intended to be heard rather than prayer being an ongoing personal communion with God? And finally, what are illustrations of the dominance of religion trying to get to God over the belief that God comes to humanity? Faith that God comes to humanity with the gift of love. That's probably enough to talk about. We'll look forward to Sunday.